Lord of the Oasis. Chapter 311, Defeated Mercenary Group. Woo! The horn was blown, and the sound was dull and long. The Swadian knights and footmen began to push forward. They, who had long been ready, were already yearning for this battle that would allow them to obtain a great victory and lead them to glory. Da-da-da! The royal knights led the knights and began to urge their war horses to run. Amongst these knights, Phyrantus, who had been watching coldly from the side, put away his horn. He raised the flag of the golden lion with a red background and gave his order, "Charge! Charge!" The knights replied in unison. The badge on Phyrantus' chest was also a lion. It was the order of the lion medal. However, when he charged, an invisible wave suddenly rose up and surrounded the surrounding knights who were running on their horses. It turned into a faint breeze and increased their speed. Order of the Lion Medal special effect: shorten the distance to reach the peak of charging status. It was less than 30 meters. The sound of the horses' hooves sounded like a flood. These 230 knights had all entered charging status. They stood side by side in 2 rows. They put down the armor-piercing lance in their hands and aimed at the formation of the mercenary groups 100 meters in front of them. Facing the charge of the heavy cavalry, any brave footman would feel their hearts palpitate. Not to mention these mercenaries who only cared about money. Blocking the front of the charge of the heavy cavalry meant that they would definitely die in battle. They would not survive at all. These mercenaries would not let their lives suffer any losses. This was because there would be great silver coins waiting for them in the future. How could they just die and left behind in this barren desert? Especially when they saw the heavy cavalry's charge, the flag of a red gold lion fluttered and swayed like a real lion. Instantly, they felt a chill in their hearts. Intimidation special effect: take the lead to reduce the enemy's morale by 1 round. And in the data. In the hearts of this group of mercenaries, they were so scared like they were walking alone on the edge of a cliff. When the defeated soldiers met their pursuers, their legs trembled, and they almost lost the will to fight. They only had cowardly appearance on their faces and unable to defend anymore. In fact, the morale of this group of mercenaries had already been declining for the past 3 days in this desert. After one more round of reduction in morale, they reached the critical point of collapse. Boom 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 boom. The hooves of the horses rushed over like a tidal wave. 30 royal Swadian knights burst out with layers of golden flames. They led 200 Swadian knights and crashed heavily into the formation of the mercenaries who were dodging. Their faces were filled with fear and despair. There was no resistance at all, and there was no obstruction at all. The violent charge was augmented with a terrifying inertia. The lance pierced through the chests of the mercenaries. The war horses knocked the bodies of the mercenaries flying. The hooves of the horses crushed the broken limbs of the mercenaries one by one. It was as easy as crushing dried weeds. On the battlefield of this desert, 30 extraordinary knights were at the front, killing a rain of blood. 200 knights were at the back, stirring up a bloody wind in the rain of blood. The mercenary group of more than 1,000 people actually collapsed just like that. They were directly charged through by just 230 knights from the beginning to the end, killing their way through a bloody path, crossing a dead silence. Regroup. Phyrantus pulled on the reins, controlling the warhorse beneath him to turn around. Behind him, the 230 knights were also doing the same thing. Especially the 30 royal knights at the front, who were bursting out with resplendent golden flames. The extraordinary power that was as fearful as the might of a king spread in all directions, bringing about a spiritual pressure. This made the mercenaries feel even more terrified. Their morale had been weakened tremendously. "It's over." Rolf grinned hideously. He did not charge with the heavy cavalry, because he was not the commander of the heavy cavalry to begin with. As the commander of the central posthouse, Rolf led the Sarandian horsemen, as well as the elite desert bandit. These cavalries from the Sarand desert were the vicious bandits. Whoosh 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 whoosh. The short javelins whizzed past. Some of the mercenaries tried to reorganize their formation and resist Kant to the death. However, the javelin rain clearly interrupted their determination. One by one, the unlucky mercenaries were directly hit by the short javelins. Even if they raised their shields, it was useless. If they were hit by the sharp, sturdy, and heavy short javelins, they would either die or be crippled. Elite Desert Bandit. As the elite of the bandits, their accuracy and lethality were even more powerful. And they were even more cunning. They would not charge into the group of mercenaries at all. As light cavalry, they had already set their position as assisting the heavy cavalry in charging. Even the Sarandian horsemen had only formed a single charge formation, waiting for the distant Swadian knight to charge. The charge of the formation of over 1,000 people was still tragic. The reason why the Swadian knight could charge and even make a bloody path was because of the 30 extraordinary knights at the front. The iron lance relied entirely on the aul's sharpness. The cavalry's charge was the same. Charge! Phyrontus ordered the Swadian knights to charge once again. Not far away, on the side, the Sarandian horsemen also followed their charge and started charging from the side. 120 Sarandian horsemen also has the ability to charge. What's more, there are 220 elite desert bandit, also raise the spear, charge together. Pift, 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 pift. The 30 royal knights flew into a rage and ignored the resistance in front of them, easily killing all the enemies in front of them. They led the knights behind them to wantonly hack and kill in this army of over 1,000 people. However, their fully armed armor could protect their safety. Even if they were hit by the counterattack, they were unharmed under the protection of the double-layered mail armor or plate armor. However, the mercenaries were not like this. The best of them were only wearing mail armor, and the worst of them even had leather armor. They were completely unable to block the charge of the knights. No one even wanted to stop them. The mercenaries' formation was already in chaos. As for the Sarandian horsemen and the elite desert bandit, their subsequent charge immediately arrived. Puff 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 puff. The spear easily pierced through the corner of the panicked and desperate line that was trying to escape. The center was pierced through again. The mercenaries on both sides could not maintain their calm at all. After the charge of the Sarandian horsemen, they suddenly collapsed. All the mercenaries began to flee to the back. The entire line was on the verge of collapse, and it was about to collapse. No, in fact, they had already collapsed. Even at the front, the mercenaries were retreating. Because the footmen had arrived. With a fan-shaped shield in hand, the Swadian footmen raised their heater shields in a neat formation. They raised the shields and charged towards them. Run, run! We're going to die. No. Help! I don't want to die here. Mom! The mercenaries cried out in grief. But even so, the Swadian footmen had already ignored the cries of the weak. The spathe sword slashed straight, the heater shield clapped, and the 1,000 Swadian footmen were like waves crashing into a reef. Wave after wave, they began to break down the already shaky defenses of the mercenaries. Moreover, at the back, the mage apprentices and mages also raised their staffs. Sharp golden blades. After a short chant, rays of golden light appeared on the weapons of the light footmen. With the enhancement of the magic power, the weapons of these light footmen were sharper, and the damage they caused to the mercenaries was also greater. Even the direct thrust of the spathe sword could tear through leather armor, and the inlaid iron scale armor could cause huge cracks. The smell of blood was thick, and hundreds of mercenaries were falling. But most of them were fleeing. The mercenaries had lost their will to fight. They even abandoned their weapons and fled to the back. The herd effect appeared. More mercenaries retreated and fled. Their entire shaky defense line collapsed just like that. They didn't even have the chance to resist. All of them began to flee. They had lost the will to resist, and there was only fear in their hearts. They were a bunch of lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Kill! Rolf led the Sarandian horsemen and the elite desert bandit to attack. Next was their mission. The entire mountain was filled with fleeing mercenaries, but they discovered in despair that they were surrounded by flat sand layers. Even if there were dune in the distance, there wasn't a single bit of vegetation that could cover them. This was different from the experience they had when they were escaping. There was also the scorching sun above their heads, making their mouths dry and their tongues dry. Rolf led the Sarandian horsemen and the elite desert bandits to watch from the side. Those who wanted to go too far out of range would draw their machetes to kill. As for the others, they allowed their two legs to wander aimlessly towards the south. Rolf and his men were all giggling, as if they were admiring a flock of sheep running. If they ran in the desert, without food or water, they would die. These mercenaries discovered this fact in despair. Then, they would become captives. The battle ended so easily. Kant had just arrived at the Posthouse hall and sat down when the elite desert bandit served as a messenger to report on the current battle results, as well as the enemy's collapse and victory. Got it, Kant nodded with a calm expression. As for the captured knights, their faces were ashen. In fact, they were supposed to be the middle-level commanders of these mercenary groups. However, because of Baron Dillon's request, they clustered here. In the end, they were all captured by Kant. The entire mercenary group was implicated and lost their specific commander until they collapsed. Their hearts were filled with despair. Even if someone was commanding them, they would still collapse. The 50 extraordinary knights frightened everyone. These knights were just ordinary knights. Some of them were wandering knights that Baron Dillon had recruited not long ago. Their true combat strength could not even defeat a Sarandian horseman. How could they fight against a level 5 Swadian knight? Baron Dillon and the two Grand Knights were also ashen-faced. The results were out. They were defeated. Baron Dillon raised his head. His eyes were ashen as he looked at Kant. He could not help but smile bitterly. Then, Lord Kant, how will you deal with us? 50 extraordinary knights had also shocked him to the core. This was a terrifying number that even the Dukedom of Leo could not gather. In fact, even Baron Dillon suspected that this was not the heritage left behind by Princess Sophia. This was because he knew that even the Silver Platter Kingdom would not be able to achieve such a magnificent cavalry troop of extraordinary knights with national level. If Princess Sophia had such a force back then, she would have long taken down the Dukedom of Leo. How would things be like this now? Chapter 312, Baron who had become a puppet. Baron Dillon's heart was already dead. He felt that he was facing a despair that he had never experienced before. It was a despair that came from the bottom of his heart. A despair that he could not fight against, and even more so, he could not get rid of it. It was a despair that could swallow up all his hopes. 50 knights with extraordinary powers. 18 mages who had mastered elemental magic. This was a power that could cause fear and shock a country. At this moment, the two Grand Knights of the East County who had been disarmed and locked up like captives were sitting on chairs in the corner with despair on their faces. They were dumbstruck as they watched the cavalry come in one after another and report the results of the battle. They listened with depressed faces as their mercenary group was completely defeated and scattered. Although the mercenary group of more than 1,000 people was recruited in the name of Baron Dillon, in reality, they were all secretly connected to the East County. The two of them were the true high-level commanders. Now, the mercenary group had collapsed. It could mean that the East County's attempt to enter the Naran Desert with the help of Baron Dillon was a complete failure. The two of them subconsciously looked at each other. They saw the fear and uneasiness in each other's eyes. There was also bitterness. If they knew that the influence of the Lord of the Naran Desert, Kant, was so terrifying, they would not have attacked so rashly. They would not have fallen out with Kant so easily. Now that they had fallen out, their relationship had become as tense as a confrontation. It was impossible for both sides to shake hands and make peace. Although there were no eternal friends, there were eternal enemies. Especially when they were invaded and violated the other party, the hatred for such enemies would be even greater. At least these two Grand Knights did not think that Kant, who had absolute high-end military power and a regular army with a high level of elite troops, would remain friendly with them when they had the advantage. The strong and the weak could not become friends. This was the difference between class and level. It was the same for between the countries and factions. Looking at Baron Dillon beside him, the Lord of the Stone Pass, who had already abandoned his previous self-restraint and arrogance and was completely obedient, one could tell that he had chosen to submit. He had abandoned the East County and turned to Kant. Or he had been forced to do so. The Stone Pass used to be a barren mountain pass. Not only did it not have much value for reclamation, but it was also directly threatened by the demonized creatures of the Sinway range, the Jack Allen in the Naran Desert. With the presence of these creatures, Stone Pass was the most undeveloped estate. Even a noble or knight with some connections would not choose this place. But it was different now. The Stone Pass happened to be the most important and the only way in and out of the Naran Desert. If one wanted to engage in the highly profitable table salt trade, then the Stone Pass was the only passage that could not be avoided no matter how hard one tried. Even if one wanted to go around it, in fact, they would have to go around the mountain paths around the Stone Pass. Normally, people did not purposely look for mountain paths, but if they tried to search for it, they would realize that was no way to go around the Stone Pass at all. That was why the East County would rope in Baron Dillon. Because only by controlling the Stone Pass could they control the Naran Desert and Oasis lookout, control the table salt trade, and even use this pass to force Kant to surrender. The idea was very good, and the plan was very thorough. If it succeeded, it would be perfect. Unfortunately, it did not succeed. In front of Kant's absolute power, everything was like a joke. Everyone had surrendered. Whether it was Baron Dillon or his vassal knights, or the two Grand Knights from the East County, as well as the numerous mercenaries. All chose to surrender. They did not have the faith to die. They were even more unwilling to die in the barren desert in humiliation. Surrender was the only choice. Elite desert bandits and Sarandian horsemen brought back all the mercenaries who had fled, but there were still people who tried to resist and escape. They were turned into corpses by the scimitars and fell on the road. It was like a road sign, but it looked extremely miserable. The seriously injured ones couldn't be treated. The elite desert bandit didn't plan to treat them either. They raised the spear in their hands, aimed it at their throat or chest, and stabbed it deeply. As blood spurted out, their bodies convulsed and ended this miserable and pitiful life. The mercenaries were not worthy of sympathy, not to mention that they were invaders who attempted to invade the Oasis lookout. Piles of weapons and armor were thrown near the tent. A large number of supplies were collected. These mercenaries who had only changed into linen robes and were half kneeling and half squatting on the ground looked at the elite desert bandit riding their horses in a daze. The bandits held scimitars and spears in their hands as they patrolled to intimidate the captured mercenaries. After counting the remaining people, there were still 724 people left. Less than one-third of them died in battle. This was also due to the fact that they killed each other and were heavily injured while they were fleeing. In fact, when nearly 100 people died in the battle, the formation of these mercenaries began to collapse. As the number of casualties increased, even if there was no follow-up pursuit, they fled in fear because of the herd effect. Rolf watched over them and shook his head mockingly at these captives. A bunch of cowards. Phyrontus returned to the hall of the posthouse and finally reported the results of the battle to Kant. "Lord, the battle has ended." "Yes." Kant nodded calmly. The outcome of this battle was within his expectations. However, he still looked up at Phyrontus and asked, "How are our casualties?" "There are only dozens of light injuries," Phyrontus replied. "No casualties." "Very good," Kant was satisfied. Beside him, Baron Dillon, the 30 knights who had also surrendered, and the 2 Grand Knights suddenly looked up at Phyrontus and Kant, their faces filled with disbelief. A battle with 0 casualties, this result was simply unacceptable to them. But the truth was just like that. Firentis's lips curled up slightly, with a hint of disdain. Our enemies are weaker than those Jack Allens. Baron Dillon lowered his head. Those knights and grand knights also smiled bitterly in defeat. The truth was just like that. They were now the losers of the battle, and they were indeed the same as the Jack Allen. However, Kant understood that Firentis was talking about the high-level Jack Allens in the kingdom of Greymane. Even when they were at the end of their rope, they could still attack the city in a bloody manner. How could these mercenaries who only cared about money and had no professional ethics compare to them? Firentis was absolutely right. These mercenaries were really weaker than those Jack Allen. However, they still had a certain effect. Kant turned his head. Beside him, Baron Dillon seemed to have sensed something. He quickly lowered his head and said respectfully, "Lord Kant, do you have any orders? I will completely obey your orders." His attitude was extremely humble and submissive, no longer having the arrogance he had before. Kant wanted this kind of effect because he wanted to go one step further. For example, to control the stone pass. Kant spoke with a smile at the corner of his mouth. "Baron Dillon, I think it has been quite some time since you came to my estate as a guest. Are you considering returning?" "I fully respect your wishes." Baron Dillon stood up and bowed his head. He only clenched his hands tightly. He understood that Kant meant to make him a puppet. All right. Kant was very satisfied with his attitude. "Let's go back today." "Yes," Baron Dillon answered. However, there was a hint of bitterness in his tone. Originally, when he came to Oasis Lookout, he wanted Kant to become a puppet or to replace him. He did not expect that in the end, he would actually become the puppet. He was Kant's puppet now, whom he had always made fun of and had always looked down on. This change made his heart tremble. A wave of resentment was stifled in his heart, but he did not dare to let it out. He dared to be angry, but he did not dare to speak. But even if he was angry, Kant would not give him this chance. The weak must understand why they were weak. Since they had lost, they could be at ease as puppets. There might be danger on the way back. Kant turned his head and looked at the lion knights beside him. He arranged, "I will send 10 grand knights to escort Baron Dillon back. To ensure his safety, I will also send 120 cavalry and 500 footmen." "You are really too considerate." Baron Dillon raised his head. His eyes were filled with shock and despair, but he could not say anything. In the end, he could only lower his head dejectedly. He was in his 40s, but he was like an old man in his 60s. This was the garrison. Kant directly extended his hand to control the stone pass. 10 grand knights, 120 cavalries, and 500 footmen. They were capable of destroying the stone pass. A mere control of this place was impossible for Baron Dillon, who had already lost his high-end combat strength and was only left with himself. As for the so-called armed forces of the estate, with the help of the militia and the lance soldiers? What a joke! Even the mercenary group, which could hold the reputation of being a little elite, had been defeated so miserably. The so-called armed forces of the estate, a group of peasant and militia, and a small number of free civilians' armed forces, were nothing but cannon fodder. Kant did not explain to Baron Dillon, and there was no need for him to explain now. He stood up and swept his gaze outside the window. The troops had regrouped and were waiting for his next order. Kant turned his head and made arrangements for Firentis. "That's it. You will temporarily follow to the stone pass and escort Baron Dillon. If possible, help to deal with some small problems at the stone pass. After all, it is a little chaotic now. There might not be any bandit groups that can appear near the pass. We need to defend it strictly." "Yes," Firentis nodded. With his ability, it would not be a problem for him to go to the pass and take charge. Baron Dillon also bowed and said, "I respect your arrangements." "That's it." Kant nodded and stood up. "Firentis, take the troops and go back with our Baron Dillon. Remember, you must ensure the safety of Baron Dillon and the pass. Yes, Firentus glanced at Baron Dillon beside him. Although his expression was calm, his eyes were filled with determination. If there was a problem, he would not hold back. Okay, Baron Dillon also bowed respectfully again. The troops were soon ready. 10 Sarlian Lion Knights, 100 Swadian Knights, and 500 Swadian footmen who had been secretly upgraded by Kant from light footmen to a higher level. They were the level 4 TROOP class, the Swadian footmen. Better weapons, better armor, better defensive equipment, and more elite combat ability. These 611 people had no problem defending the stone pass. Moreover, just those 10 Grand Knights with extraordinary powers were not something an ordinary troop could contend against. This was Kant's first step in conquering the Dukedom of Leo. Chapter 313, Chapter 313. Kant's War Trophies. The noble families of the Dukedom of Leo were greedily spying on Kant. And wasn't Kant scheming against them? The Naran Desert was really barren. Even with the system's help, Kant had to use military force to ensure his own strength and control of the area. But even so, the development foundation of Naran Desert was here. Even the development of the Sinway range was not very high. In terms of environment, the barren desert and the complicated mountain land could never be compared to the fertile plains. This was the eternal truth, the advantages and disadvantages brought by the environment. Now, Kant had taken the first step to conquer the Dukedom of Leo. The North County was not rich. It could be said that it was the poorest county in the Dukedom of Leo. But it was still much better than the Naran Desert. Moreover, Kant's goal was to use the North County as a springboard to extend his power to the South County or East County. As long as he obtained more troops, he could rule all of the country. Strength was the truth. Moreover, Kant had the bloodline of the Dukedom of Leo. In fact, he was the second-in-line heir of the Grand Duke of Leo, Cameron. It was just that due to the political factors of his ancestors, he was excluded. If he wanted to fight for the Grand Duke's title, Kant was completely qualified to do so. With Firentus leading the team, 10 Lion Knights, 100 Swadian Knights, and 500 level 4 Swadian footmen, they could completely take root in the Stone Pass. While ensuring their own safety, they could also firmly control the Stone Pass in their hands. They were not afraid of the backlogs of other forces. After all, they were extraordinary knights who could run amok in the Dukedom of Leo and receive the courtesy of many noble families. Even if they met the royal family, they could still maintain their poise and receive the grand etiquette in front of Grand Duke Cameron. This was the privilege of the strong. And the prosperity of a country had a measurement of strength. It was also the number of these extraordinary knights. Not to mention the Stone Pass. Even in the entire North County, there were only 10 extraordinary knights recorded in the official records. Now, there were 10 of them here, and they were all united. They were all grand knights who had unified extraordinary power. How could they not capable of intimidating this place and control Stone Pass? Of course they could. This was Kant's confidence. Firentus led the team and left. The central posthouse returned to its usual silence. Serandian horsemen were watching over the 724 captives. They were all gathered at the corner of the posthouse. They were squatting on the sand, they were ashen-faced. The panic and despair in their eyes could no longer be concealed. They had all seen that Baron Dillon had been taken away by those elite knights. As for their actual commander, the 2 Grand Knights from the East County were left here alone, including the 30 vassal knights of Baron Dillon. None of them returned with the returning troops. They were all locked up in the posthouse. If they could, they would rather leave this desert far away and never dare to set foot in it again. But this was their wishful dream. Kant would not let all of them leave. After all, these were his captives. They could mine a large amount of table salt for him in the salt mine, ensuring that the table salt trade would be smooth again. Before the sky veil of death arrived, Kant planned to accumulate a batch of coarse salt. This was the confidence of the table salt trade in the future. Only the continuous table salt trade could bring about a golden eagle that could be exchanged for dinar. It could allow Kant to develop faster and expand his power. This was a crucial matter. Once the table salt trade was interrupted, Kant would also fall into a situation where his capital chain would collapse. After all, the current situation was very disadvantageous to him. Even if Kant had the ability to overthrow the dukedom of Leo, the subsequent governing work would be absolutely difficult. It could even be said that it could not be carried out. After all, those nobles would definitely not allow Kant to suddenly enter their traditional sphere of influence. Even if he destroyed a noble force, Kant would not be able to fill the gap of force. He did not have enough troops. Similarly, he did not have enough allies. If any of the noble families in a county could support Kant, then he could directly swallow the dukedom of Leo. At the very most, he could split the gaps of force and gift it to these allies. This was also the benefit of the alliance between the noble families. It was just a diplomatic mean. Kant did not completely enter the dukedom of Leo because of this reason. If he really attacked the dukedom of Leo and defeated a large number of enemies, he would only leave a large area of territories and give it to others for free. Kant naturally would not do such a thing. If he had the ability, he would rather devour the world. If he did not have the ability now, he would devour the world bit by bit. These were all ways of strategizing. After arranging the central posthouse, Kant needed to clean up the battlefield as soon as possible. Baron Dillon sealed the stone pass, causing the trade caravan to be unable to enter. When they returned to the stone pass, the trading route would once again open up once Phyrontus took control of the area. At that time, the trade caravan would definitely continue to rush over. At that time, the trade of table salt would probably be even larger. Kant had already displayed his muscles. He could be considered the overlord of this place. Even Baron Dillon was defeated, and the stone pass was controlled by his forces. It would be really difficult for the other noble families to enter the Aron desert. First, they had to conquer the stone pass. Then, they had to pass through the desert to attack the central post house. Finally, they had to face the Oasis lookout. If they still had a bit of enthusiasm and morale when they faced the massive defensive walls of Trondheim Castle, it could be certain that they would choose to withdraw their troops at that time instead of forcing themselves to attack the city. Back then, even the high-level Jack Allen of the Kingdom of Greymane, who were so invincible at infantry battle sequence, when they attacked the fortress-level Trondheim, the 5-meter-tall city wall and 2-meter-tall attic were enough to wipe out their entire army, let alone the ordinary human troop. Even though it was also because of those high-level Jack Allen who were at the end of their rope. However, Kant was so weak that he could only protect himself at that time. How could he have the current powerful army back then? Now, he could be called the Overlord. Rolf. Kant made the arrangements and instructed him, clean up the battlefield. From next week, the table salt trade will be opened again. Continue to patrol and maintain order. Guard this place well. Understood, Rolf immediately nodded solemnly. Then I'll return. Kant frowned. The undead in the depths of the desert were still threatening him. Although 5 months was not short, it was definitely not long. After pondering for a moment, he turned his head to look at the mages who were talking to each other behind him. 11 mage apprentices and 7 mages. These mages from the Unfoth Empire seemed to be having a good time talking about the sun disk. They were mumbling to each other. Their voices were not loud, but they were in a state of discussion like academics. Ahem. Kant coughed lightly. The 18 mages immediately reacted and came to Kant's side to bow. Sorry, my lord. It's fine. Kant shook his head and asked, from your conversation, it seems like you're discussing the sun disk. Yes, my lord. Such a magical object like the sun disk is indeed the focus of our discussion. In view of the current predicament, we also agree that the sun disk that contains positive energy is indeed the best way for us to deal with it. The leader of the mages, who was also the mage apprentice who suggested Kant to study the sun disk. After discussion and the initial research, they had come to some conclusions. However, they still said with some regret, if we can get more information about the sun disk, we might be able to analyze more things. Perhaps we can get more detailed results from the analysis of the so-called sun god sect, which has disappeared in history. This, Kant frowned. I remember that there were sun disks in the ruins of the peak of the mountain and the ruins of the temple at the bottom of the mountain. Didn't you guys study them in Aron? That's true. The mages looked at each other. They looked at each other and were a little speechless. We only helped to defend in Aron and dealt with some demonized creatures. We didn't observe those mysterious objects that haven't been appraised in detail. Haven't been appraised, Kant frowned. It's those strange objects that we don't know their uses yet. The mage answered, for example, those strange objects in the castle, including the sun disk, have been appraised. When we touched them, we all understood the function of this thing in our hearts. I understand, Kant nodded. It should be the function of the system. The mage continued to explain, however, we have studied the sun disk before, so we have the ability to recognize similar disks. We can easily identify them and figure out the power they contain. If we obtain more sun disks, we might really be able to develop special spells that gather positive energy. With the help of these strange objects that contain positive energy, we can fight against the undead race's sky veil of death, which has extremely heavy negative energy. That's it. Let's go to Aron. Kant made his decision. Rolf frowned and suggested, Lord Kant, what about these captives? Let the cavalries bring them back. Kant waved his hand and ordered in a deep voice, let all the captives look to the south. Yes, Rolf replied. This order was very strange, but he still chose to follow it. He returned very quickly. Rolf reported, everything has been arranged. Yes. Kant nodded, but a dialog box appeared in his eyes. As he confirmed, the data flow spread. The 500 Swadian footmen who were waiting in line in the north were instantly surrounded by the data flow. After a few seconds, they suddenly stretched, as if there was a huge change. After the data flow disappeared, the ones who appeared in the north were not those light footmen. Instead, it was 500 cavalries who were equipped with horses and chain armor. Swadian heavy cavalries. This was the upgrade of the troop class, from level 3 light footmen to level 4 heavy cavalry. In the entire continent of Karadia, the level 4 heavy cavalry had the best defense, the best equipment, and the strongest charging force. And it was a total of 500 of them. Chapter 314, Finishing the Matters in the Posthouse. The data stream disappeared, and the quality of the troops instantly skyrocketed. The 500 Swadian light cavalries had all been transformed into the Swadian heavy cavalries that were equipped with heavy armor, including men and horses. Their swords, hammers, spears, and shields were fully armed, and could brazenly break through the formation of the footmen. This victory had brought about a rich battle result. This included the experience points needed to upgrade all the light footmen to level up and become an advanced troop class. There were also the 11 mage apprentices. They could also level up. Following Kant's choice, the data stream appeared, the package was broken, and disappeared into the void. In the Posthouse hall, the mage apprentices who were originally wearing white mage apprentice robes had completed their transformation and advancement. They were wearing dark mage robes. They were holding magic staffs with large gems embedded in them. Their young faces had also turned into middle-aged men who had experienced the vicissitudes of life. They were no longer apprentices who had just walked out of the mage tower and were still in the training stage. Instead, they had grasped high-level spells, various types of battlefield experience, and understood a large amount of elemental knowledge. Official mages. My lord. The mages bowed together. They also bowed respectfully to the 7 seniors from before, and their attitude was extremely good. Kant also nodded in satisfaction. Not bad. These 18 official mages were stronger than the 30 mage apprentices. Whether it was large-scale AoE spells, single-target powerful spells, or all kinds of buffs, all of them had a qualitative improvement. Previously, when they were dealing with those mercenaries who were demoralized, the mages did not cast any spells. To these mages, they were just bunch of trash like mercenaries. If they attacked, it was just wasting their precious spell slots. Just the extraordinary knights, ordinary knights, and light footmen were enough to defeat those mercenaries. With the mage apprentices' small status spells, it was even easier to deal with them. The real use of these mages was more effective in intense high-end battles. They were not yet necessary in the small-scale military conflicts. But now, there was still a time for them to come in handy. Kant waved his hand and arranged, "All 18 of you, follow me to Aron and study the sun disk that is temporarily stored there." After a pause, Kant seemed to have thought of something. He said in a deep voice, "And study the mysterious items left behind by the lost city." "As you command," the mages nodded. Aron town was located on the peak of the mountain. The peak of the mountain seemed to be a temple on the surface of the earth in ancient times. It was protected by the mysterious power of a strange object. After tens of thousands of years, it still had not disappeared. It was still in good condition. It had even become the nest of the savage demonized creatures. However, the world was unpredictable. When Kant took down the sun disk of the temple on the surface of the earth, the temple instantly turned into ashes and collapsed in front of Kant's eyes, as if it had already disappeared in the long river of time. Therefore, Kant did not act rashly when facing the ruins of the temple underground. There were many valuable items in there. For example, there were 3 sun disks that released beams of light at the top of the ruins. After a clever refraction, the disks brought some dim light into the huge ruins of the temple so that it would not be completely dark. Moreover, the most valuable thing was the golden coffin that was still placed on the stone platform. It still stayed intact and did not have any damage despite thousands of years. 10,000 years ago, the bloodline of the gods had actually survived until now. In fact, it had to be said that the coffin attracted Kant's curiosity more than the material of its own gold. If one could analyze the secret of immortality, it would mean eternal life. As long as it was a living creature that would die, it would yearn for the eternal life. "Royal Knight, lead the team back to the castle." Kant immediately arranged knights and heavy cavalry, watch over the captives on their return journey. After dispersing these captives, arrange them to the salt mine. Pay attention to sending troops to patrol the salt mine from time to time to ensure the safety of the place. Understood, the captain of the Royal Knight from behind nodded. This was a necessary order. 724 captives, the number was already too many. Although they were under the watch of the Royal Knights and heavy cavalries, they could not cause much trouble. However, in the salt mine, with only 30 light footmen and 40 desert bandits, in addition to the occasional camel caravans and civilians, they could not withstand the assault of nearly 1,000 people. Furthermore, there were more than 300 captives in the area. Even if the captives were to riot with bare hands, it would be enough to wipe out the salt mine Posthouse. Kant narrowed his eyes. He naturally did not wish to see such an outcome. After pondering for a moment, Kant added, "Send a Royal Knight to lead the 80 newly recruited desert bandits over the past 2 weeks to station at the salt mine Posthouse to prevent a possible riot." "Yes," the Royal Knight captain who was listening to the orders behind immediately replied. Kant took a deep breath and said, "At the critical moment, we can directly suppress them with force." The Royal Knight captain also replied resolutely, "Understood." A captive riot was dangerous. Moreover, they had just become slaves and had yet to fully accept their unfortunate fate. They had not gone through a period of long-term fatigue and torture. Once there was a riot, there would be the effect of a herd of sheep who were in the same boat. All of them would start a riot. Even if the salt mine was near a desolate desert, there would still be a riot, fighting for that short-term freedom. Although it would eventually be suppressed and pacified, it would cause a certain amount of trouble to Kant. After everything was arranged, Kant stood up. The next thing he had to deal with was more important matters. He waved his hand at Rolf and warned, "Watch this posthouse and ensure that there are no problems with the table salt trade in the future. If there are no accidents, I will pass by the posthouse at the end of the month. When the time comes, just let me bring back all the gold eagles that have exchanged for." "Understood," Rolf said solemnly. "I will do my best." "Okay," Kant nodded. As a well-known villain noble of the continent of Karadia, although Rolf's reputation was tarnished, his ability was certain. This was also the reason why Kant dared to let him manage the central posthouse and also deal with the trade caravan. Kant was relieved that Rolf was in charge of this place. Kant and the others are ready to move on. However, the 30 royal knights, 100 knights, and 500 heavy cavalry troops were escorting the 724 captured captives and trekking towards the Trondheim castle. They did not follow Kant. There are only 10 lion knights and 18 mages, although Kant goes to the Aron town. They travelled light. But these 28 men as guards, even a 500-men troop arrived, they will be easily defeated by these guards. The real combat strength cannot be measured by the number of people. 10 melee fighting lion knights. 18 mages who master single, group, base stats, buff, and summoning spells. How can they be weak? They could only measure their combat strength based on the nature summon spell that the 18 mages had mastered. Each of them could summon 5 golems, and they could cast it twice a day. In total, there were 180 golems. Each golem was an elemental creature, and they had been treated with magic constructs. They were 2.5 meters tall. Their bodies were covered in solid stones and mysterious anti-magic runes. In addition, they had a two-handed war hammer made of steel in their hands. It was enough for them to carve out a bloody path among the regular troops made of flesh and blood, and forcefully smash out a future. This was also why the mages were the true main force of casting spells in the Unfoth Empire's troops. Not only did they have single-target offensive spells, there were also group-damaging spells, group-enhancing spells, and various types of basic offensive spells. This included the ability to summon golems in key battle positions and form an army alone. If an army were defeated on a certain battlefield, or if the defense line was in danger due to the enemy's fierce attacks, these mages could summon golems as an emergency force to break through the enemy's defense and crush the enemy's fierce attacks. They could save the troops that were in a stalemate or predicament and form an advantage on the battlefield locally. From there, they could lead the way and form an overall advantage. The world of warlike that the Unfoth Empire was in was much stronger than the continent of Karadia. Even the Pender continent could not compare to it. Even the various battles that Kant had experienced were as laughable as a village chief's infighting. That was the real graveyard of the empire. The battle of life and death that came from the races. All the way to the south, Baron Dillon led the mercenary group and arrived. At the same time, they sealed off the stone pass. There were very few trade caravans in the desert. Or rather, no trade caravan would dare to risk the danger of being massacred. This was because all the noble families had already hinted to their trade caravan to temporarily stop the table salt trade. After all, they all believed that Baron Dillon, who had already obtained the support of the East County, could easily take over the Oasis lookout. At that time, it would be their time to make an appearance. It would be their time. They could use all sorts of methods to coerce and bribe to obtain the ownership of part of the salt mine. Or they could directly kill Baron Dillon and start a new table salt distribution. They could let all the great noble families eat their fill and unite together to chop off the claws of the East County that extended to the South County and North County. When the noble families united, it could be said that it was equivalent to the power of the dukedom. This was similar to the feudal era in Europe. Noble families were equal to the country. And the high-ranking noble families were the important pillars to form the country. In fact, a small noble or the second son of the Grand Duke who had been exiled would disappear quietly under the compromise of the various noble families. There would not even be many things recorded in the history books. This plan was very beautiful. It was to stop the attack with silence and strike after the attack. However, things were not as simple as they had imagined. Kant was more than second son of the Grand Duke who they had originally thought was weak and incompetent and only had a benevolent character and reputation. Kant was more than an exiled noble that had no power at all. Kant was not a coward noble that would give up the salt mine that he fought to the others. It was completely different. Kant, the ruler of the Naran Desert, the powerful overlord of the Dukedom of Leo. How could he fall because of this small setback? He would simply turn the tables and let these noble families know who the overlord was, and who set the laws and rules in the Naran Desert. It was only because of the threat from the deeper part of the desert that Kant could only choose peace for the time being. Otherwise, the Dukedom of Leo had already entered a strategic phase. But for now, it was fine. Kant went to his town in the Sinway range, looking for a solution to the problem. Chapter 315, Lush Aron. Kant led the team. After a day of trekking, the Sinway mountain pass was in sight. At the top of the outer hill, there was a wooden building standing there. At the top of the 6-meter-high watchtower, there were also sentries on guard. They had also discovered Kant and the others who were trekking in the desert. That was the mountain pass Posthouse, where 40 desert bandits were stationed. They saw Kant and the others approaching. The 30 desert bandits rode their horses and scattered. They carried their scimitars and spears and sped through the dune. They used the left and right sides of the roads as crossing points and surrounded them at an extremely fast speed. The remaining 10 desert bandits were waiting for the results at the top of the hill. If the situation was not right, they would immediately retreat and report to Aron about any incidents. They had already formulated a strategy. However, before they even got close, they had already used their good eyesight to discover that it was their supreme lord. The war horses beneath them galloped. The scattered troops gathered again. They put away their scimitars and spears and quickly came to Kant's side. They dismounted from their horses and kneeled respectfully on the ground. They placed their hands on their chests and saluted, "My lord. It is an honor to meet you." "Well, get up." Kant nodded and gestured for them to get up. He glanced at the surrounding scenery. Everything was as usual. He asked, "It seems that nothing unusual happened around here while I was away." "Everything is normal," the desert bandits answered respectfully. "Very good." Kant nodded in satisfaction. This was his secret base, his second home outside the Naran Desert. It was also the future agricultural and handicraft base. It must not be known by outsiders. At least at this critical point, it could not be known by outsiders. It could be considered as one of his escape routes. If there was a problem with the Oasis lookout, then the towns in the Sinway range would be the temporary shelter for retreat. But Kant tried his best to ensure that he wouldn't come to this point. If he had to come here, that meant that his forces in the Oasis lookout were almost destroyed. Kant urged his horse forward. The desert bandits quickly got back on their horses and led the way. At the foot of the hill, a spring water appeared between the layers of sand. It was about 10 square meters. Some soil was scattered around it, forming a soil layer of about 30 square meters. With the nourishment of the spring water, many lush vegetation grew. They were all desert plants that were easy to grow at the edge of the Sinway range and the Naran Desert. As long as there was water, they could grow quickly. Seeing Kant looking at the spring water and the vegetation growing with interest, the desert bandits took the initiative to report, "At that time, my lord, you asked us to take care of this spring water. During our free time, we dug a spring pit and used a wooden bucket to pick up the soil in the mountain and sprinkle some grass seeds. Without much effort, this small oasis was formed." "Well done, very well done." Kant nodded in satisfaction. With a smile on his face, he carefully looked at this small oasis. On the surface of the sand near the soil layer, he could see the claw marks of small rodents. It seemed that this place had formed a temporary and relatively fragile ecological chain. After all, water was the most precious thing in the desert. This oasis will become even bigger in the future. Kant spoke and turned to the north. That was the direction of the central posthouse and Trondheim castle. He once had an idea. That was to directly form a long river that could lead to the depths of the desert by extending the river water that originated from Aron town. Especially Kant had that river card in his sleeve. If he wanted to, a river that could sail boats would appear in the desert right now. There was even soil and vegetation on both sides of the river. It could be seen as an oasis. Whether it was to develop agriculture or animal husbandry, it would not be a problem to build some villages along both sides of the river. As long as it did not exceed the river's capacity, it would be able to accumulate over time. As the river nourished the banks, it would not be a problem to develop into a river that could nourish civilization by moving some soil manually. For example, the Nile River in Egypt, the two river basins in the fertile crescent soil of the Middle East, and even the ancient Lulun kingdom in the Far East were all powerful forces that rose up with the help of the rivers and oases in the desert and desert regions. Kant saw the Naran Desert as the foundation of his hegemony. Naturally, he attached great importance to it. If possible, he would certainly give this desert an unimaginable new life. In fact, he was officially changing it. Oasis Lookout had already doubled compared to its initial state. It could meet the water needs of everyone, in addition to the water needed for agriculture and animal husbandry. It could also fill up the groundwater with abundant water. This had increased the foundation of Oasis Lookout's development by dozens of times. Moreover, Kant was still planning to open up a desert river. Once it was opened up, Oasis Lookout would be completely connected to the Sinway Range. It would be connected by lines. Both sides of the river would be fully developed. Especially when Kant obtained more and more extraordinary items and obtained more and more rewards regarding the rules, the Naran Desert would really become the legendary Jiangnan beyond the Great Wall in Kant's impression. Kant could feel his entire body trembling just by thinking about it. This was an extremely perfect strategic idea. But there were a few setbacks. Maintain the greenery here. You guys did a good job. Kant came back to his senses. He turned his head to look at the desert bandits who were waiting respectfully beside him and praised, "If you have the ability, then let it all out. Let the spring water here become bigger and the vegetation become denser. You guys will receive the reward that you deserve. Thank you for your praise, my lord." The desert bandits were all delighted. This was a compliment from the Supreme Lord. In their eyes, the value of glory was no less than winning a battle. Kant nodded and continued to ride on his horse. "We don't have much time left. Let's go." Behind them, the 10 lion knights and the 18 mages immediately rode on their horses and followed. Under the respectful gazes of the desert bandits, they stepped onto the road paved with green stone slabs and started to gallop faster than in the desert. The stone slab was easy to walk on, not to mention that it was a road paved with stone. Under the system's rules, it was very smooth. They followed the road and climbed over the mountains. By the side of the road was a small river about 5 to 6 meters wide. It flowed along the mountain at a very gentle speed. Occasionally, one could see fish swimming along or against the current. It was very carefree. These were fish that swam up from the underground river, and there were also fish that sneaked out from the fishing grounds. The Aron town, which was located in the Sinway Range, had already taken shape. It didn't take long. After climbing over a mountain, the relatively flat mountain peak appeared in front of them. There were neatly planned buildings everywhere. From afar, one could see many people bustling around. Along with the spiraling smoke, the entire town gave people the feeling of a paradise. At the foot of the mountain peak was a neat circle of city walls. The arrow tower had been completed and troops were stationed there. Soldiers holding long halberds and lance could be seen patrolling on the city walls. Outside the mountain peak, a large amount of farmland had been reclaimed on the eastern side of the mountain. Lush wheat grew in it. Looking from afar, one could feel that it was full of greenery. The scene was very pleasant. Farmers carried farm tools and walked between the canals and the protective forest on the mountain peak. Many peasant women could be seen. They were driving sheep one after another, grazing on the surrounding mountains. They were bored to death and used tree branches to drive the lazy lambs, telling them to go to the slopes where the vegetation was more lush, to eat the tender leaves to grow faster. It was truly a paradise. Kant's second base, Aron. Go. Kant lightly knocked on the horse's belly and increased his speed. The knights and mages behind also followed, everyone looking forward with curiosity. In the distance, there were already Ravenstern rangers with excellent eyesight. When they noticed the cavalry from outside the mountains, they immediately blew the bugles in a regular manner. Following a few short and orderly bugles, troops immediately appeared in the town. 50 Rodic sergeant, who were holding long-handled heavy knives and carrying broad shields on their backs, quickly walked out. At the city gate, Rodic snipers were already prepared. Including the arrow towers and towers on both sides, the Ravenstern rangers and wardens who were suitable for rapid shooting, were all looking into the distance, paying attention to who the team of horses was. However, they did not make a big fuss and put up a tight defense. Even the peasant who was outside did not hide in the town. After all, this was a hidden town. They had arrived openly, and there were no desert bandits who had come to inform them in advance. Perhaps they were on the same side. After all, only the Oasis lookout in the desert knew about this place. As expected, when they saw that it was Kant who was approaching, the soldiers who had initially walked out of the city gate immediately bowed. "My lord!" They cheered, their eyes filled with enthusiasm. "There's no need to be so polite," Kant stretched out his hand, but his eyes looked towards the two figures who were walking towards them. His eyes were filled with shock. "Lord Kant!" The two of them came before Kant and bowed respectfully. It was James and Bunduk. Kant's two NPC heroes. "Yes." Kant nodded. The shock in his eyes disappeared, but the doubt was still in his eyes. James was still wearing mail armor. He was holding a spade, a short sword and round shield, and there was a medical device on his waist. It was not enough to make Kant stunned and confused. Most importantly, it was Bunduk. Kant got off the horse and asked, "Bunduk, you look pretty good." "Yes." Bunduk still looked handsome. He was wearing mail armor and linen-woven clothes. He looked elegant. He walked over and took the initiative to hold the reins for Kant. He said gratefully, "Thanks to you and everyone's help, I was able to escape from the threat of death." "It's nothing," Kant shook his head, but he still asked, "You have recovered?" "I have recovered." Bunduk nodded. This caused Kant to be even more puzzled. He turned to James and asked, "I remember that you said that Bunduk's injury needs at least half a year to recover a little. If he wants to recover, it will take at least 2 years. If he fully recovers, it will take 5 years. James sighed and looked at Bunduk. But in the past week, he has changed a lot every day. His body is actually recovering on its own, and even, he paused. It has changed a lot. Chapter 316, The Demonic Body. An incredible change has happened. James's tone was filled with emotion and a hint of amazement. As the most famous doctor in the continent of Karadia, his medical skills were undoubtedly at the top level. However, he still had no clue about the changes that Bunduk had experienced. Or rather, it had already surpassed the understanding of conventional medicine that he had learned before. But behind him, a mage's surprised cry could be heard. This is... They all looked at Bunduk, their faces filled with shock. It was obvious that they were surprised to see the changes of this general who had once been saved by them. Kant frowned and asked in a serious tone, "What have you discovered?" "What's happened to me?" Even Bunduk stood on the spot. Although his body had undergone a strange transformation, which could even be described as a perfect evolution, allowing him to transform from an ordinary body into a special physique that could quickly recover from injuries, he still wanted to know what had happened to him. This concerned his life, and everyone wanted to know. That's right. The mages looked at each other and saw the affirmation in each other's eyes. The leader of mages took a deep breath and said slowly, "Demonic body. Demonic body." James and Bunduk widened their eyes in surprise. Even Kant frowned slightly and scanned Bunduk's forehead and skin. He looked no different from usual and did not find any features related to demon horns or demons. "That's right, it's the demonic body." The mage leader continued to be certain and said in surprise, "Yes, the demonic body, it's really a miracle." This, Bunduk was a little stunned. How did I become the demonic body?" "That's right, it's impossible." James, who was beside him, could not believe it. He said to the mages, "Bunduk is still a human, how did he become a demon? Even if his wounds have healed, they are still the same as usual. He looks completely human, how can he be called a demon?" They were born in the world of Karadia, which was a fictional historical world. Although there were descriptions of the so-called demons, undead, and even gods, there were actually no real creatures like them in their world. They were just the ideas and descriptions of the scholars or theologians in history. Even if they came to this land of miracle, coming to this world, which had demons, undead, and even gods, their original concepts still existed, and they did not suffer much impact. They had doubts in these fantasy races. But the mages from the world of Wind of War, the Unfoth Empire, could clearly understand this change. Because they originally came from the fantasy-type magic world. Demonic body. The mage leader spoke slowly, explaining in a grave tone, "This is a special physique. It is a physique that can only be formed after being infected by demon-type negative energy and directly pouring demon blood into the body and fusing with one's own blood." "It sounds very shocking," Kant narrowed his eyes. "That's right." The leader sighed. "Even I'm shocked." He looked at Bunduk, his tone was serious. If this happened to an ordinary person, they would be directly injured by the negative energy and corrosive nature of the blood of demons. Moreover, the blood of demons and human blood are two completely different things. A serious repulsive reaction would produce a fatal effect. "But, why did I survive?" Bunduk gulped. Although he did not understand the technical terms in the mage leader's words, he also understood that he had really survived. This is the problem. The mage leader did not directly answer. Looking at Bunduk, they looked at each other and came to a conclusion. "Perhaps it is because your physique is compatible with the demon's blood, and the negative energy was suppressed by Lord Kant's divine power, that's why he obtained the demonic body." They paused for a moment, the mages still spoke. "But it doesn't matter. As long as you obtain a demonic body, you will be able to control part of the demon's power. Rapid recovery is only one of them. As time passes, the development of the demon's body will become deeper and deeper, and you will be able to obtain even more power. You can even benefit from the foundation of humans and become stronger than demons. So, it's a good thing." Bunduk widened his eyes. "Of course," the mages nodded. "This is really crazy," James was still lamenting. At the same time, he reached out his hand and subconsciously touched the medical tools behind him. He shook his head and said, "My medical skills may really not be of much help. No, I can recover too quickly. It's still inseparable from your recuperation and care." Bunduk comforted him from the side. They were old friends who had known each other for a long time. Bunduk also thanked him. "The medicinal herbs that you have used in the past few days are all herbs that you found in the nearby mountains. I feel that after using them, my body will be strengthened." The mages added, "That's right. During the development process of the demonic body, a large amount of physical strength will be consumed. Using medicinal herbs will help to restore the body. At the same time, it will replenish a large amount of nutrients. It is also an important aid to the development of the demonic body. Perhaps when the demonic body is completely developed in the future, Master Bunduk, who has the power of the demon race, will be unexpectedly powerful. For Lord Kant, I'm willing to use all the power I have. Bunduk looked at Kant and promptly expressed his loyalty. Kant nodded. He was not a leader who was good at being jealous. Most importantly, the system had already stabilized everyone's loyalty. Although this was the real world, these people were still flesh and blood. However, after the system's changes and the changes in the rules, no one would betray Kant, just like how they couldn't betray their closest person, protect their deepest and most untouchable bottom line. They were stubborn and loyal. To be able to obtain the demonic body was really out of Kant's expectations. Bunduk's strength increased. But for Kant, his strength also increased. Because Bunduk was his subordinate general, he was able to lead a team into battle, or he was a key figure in a certain area. His own strength had increased, so naturally, it had increased Kant's strength as well. Continue to wait here, I need the day you fully recover. Kant instructed Bunduk. Understood. Bunduk was also very loyal. Quickly enter the town. James also made a respectful gesture to Kant. I just told the servants to arrange a sumptuous welcome banquet. I think you won't believe it. Now, this town can not only eat delicious pasta, but also all kinds of fresh vegetables, red meat, and fat fish. Very good, I'm looking forward to it. Kant nodded and walked toward the city gate in front. The people behind him quickly followed. At the top of the city gate, the Ravenstern Rangers, Wardens, and Rodok snipers all bowed and greeted Kant. They all watched Kant walk past with passion, and the atmosphere was as lively as if the king had personally visited them. The stone road extended all the way to the peak of the mountain. On both sides of the road, there were already some decorations, and a lot of decorative wildflowers were planted. It looked beautiful. It gave a good first impression after entering the town. At least when Kant left, the town was still very simple. After more than a month of construction, all kinds of buildings had been built, including more houses, which attracted more civilians. The town was an important place for people to live in, not to mention that it was a base for agriculture and animal husbandry, which needed more civilians. If handicraft industries were to be moved here in the future, the amount of labor required would be even more shocking. Of course, if the town's agricultural foundation was not well established, Kant would not have completely moved handicraft industries, such as sugar mills, wool mills, linen mills, and tanning mills to this place. Even if there were wool mills and tanning mills here, they would not expand the scale of handicraft industries too much. The increase in population was a help to towns, but it was also a pressure. The food problem was the most important factor. As long as the town's agriculture developed and could ensure self-sufficiency, the handicraft industry would develop as well. Moreover, the current handicraft industry did not have much of an effect on Kant. After all, the products of the handicraft industry would be used for trade. There was very little that could be used by themselves, and it could not be compared to the essential agriculture that consumed a lot of resources. They entered the council hall. It was still the same as before. Kant sat on the main seat and asked Bunduk and James, I remember that I once stored a sun disk made of gold here. You should have an impression of it. Oh, of course. James nodded. It's in the storeroom. This kind of useless handicraft was equivalent to the most common gold without the system's determination. After all, it did not release its own power and was only in its natural status. Even if it was known that it was a rare item of high value, it could not be used. Other than storing it, there was no other way. Kant did not care, as long as it was safe here. Looking at James, he continued to ask, when I was away, I was at the bottom of the temple ruins, in the direction of the ancient passage. There should be no abnormalities, right? No. Bunduk answered, I just went down to take a look today. It's very normal. There aren't any unusual movements. Okay, Kant ordered, go prepare some wood and make a long ladder. I plan to go to the ruins of the temple ruins and take a look at the stone platform. If possible, I will also carry out the gold in the coffin. I will go prepare now. James immediately got up and went to prepare. The long ladder was very easy to make. At present, in order to build a town, there was a lot of high-quality wood. Moreover, even if they needed wood, they could go to the surrounding forest to cut it down. It would not take too long to mobilize the soldiers and civilians to cut down a lot of high-quality wood. Not to mention making a long ladder, they could even make a wooden bridge. The Bunduk people also had a very high talent in making small wooden buildings. After all, they lived in the mountains. Wood was an important building material. Wooden houses, wooden bridges across cliffs, and even wooden boats by the sea all needed wood to be meticulously made. The carpentry skills of the kingdom of Bunduk were also famous in the mainland. The chefs also brought over the sumptuous food prepared for Kant and the others. They were chatting while enjoying the meals. Soon, the civilians used tools to build 4 wooden ladders that were 10 meters long and 3 meters wide. This was for safety reasons. The gold was heavy, and below it was the turbulent subterranean river. If there was an accident and they fell into the subterranean river, the consequences would be unimaginable. They could only be careful. Chapter 317, Ruins of the Underground Temple. Kant wiped his greasy mouth with a towel as he got up and left the council hall. The food prepared for this banquet was indeed abundant. Although it was obvious that it was hastily prepared, the fresh ingredients were indeed the delicacies that they loved, as they could only eat dried meat and bread during the journey. In fact, even the Trondheim castle, located in the Oasis lookout, couldn't eat such fresh ingredients. It was a rich gift from the Senway range. The mountains were rugged. However, the richness of the natural resources was amazing. The Bunduk people were originally residents of the mountains. They had a good adaptability to the Senway range. Now, they had come to the Senway range and established their new Aron town, the tenacity that the Bunduk people used to be proud of and their excellent survival ability in the mountains were fully utilized. Whether it was the exploration of the surrounding mountains or the development of the nearby mountains, the Bunduk people were at ease. They even cleared the nearby threats with the help of the Ravenstern people, who were used to fight in the mountains. For example, the carnivores, the more terrifying demonized creatures, including the jack-allen that lived in the Senway range. They had been cleared out. Even if there were some of them escaped occasionally, they would not pose much of a threat. Almost every few days, the hunting team formed by the Ravenstern Rangers and Bunduk-trained crossbowmen would once again clear the surrounding mountains and ravines to ensure the safety of the civilians when they moved around here. Relying on the 5-meter-tall city wall built along the rock layers along the mountainside and the 7-meter-tall arrow tower, they moved very quickly. As the trees on the surrounding mountains were cut down, clearing the space inside and outside the city walls added a bit of security. As long as there was danger that the hunting team could not deal with, the footmen on guard on the city walls could come to support at any time. Soldier that was wearing double-layer heavy chain armor, with iron scale armor and linen robe on the outside. He wore a thick helmet and held a heavy machete that looked like a long halberd in both hands. On his back was a wide shield that looked like a small door, and on his waist was a Bunduk battle knife. This was the tall and strong Bunduk sergeant, who looked like a rock in the mountain area of Bunduk. He was a top-tier level 5 footman. His defense was extremely strong. Even if he encountered the strongest level 6 footman, the Nord Royal Guards would be able to fight him. If they were to fight in the mountains, the throwing effect of the flying axes of the Nord Royal Guards would be weakened. These Bunduk sergeants would form a long halberd formation to defend against the enemy. If they were to fight in close combat with broad shields and battle sabers, their combat strength would be able to suppress the Nord Royal Guards. They could be said to be a fortress on the battlefield. With such a high defense, even a demonized creature would not be able to break through it. With their combined strength and excellent military formation, they were able to strangle the Nord royal guards in the cage. Even the more powerful savaged demonized creatures, together with rangers and snipers, died miserably. In the cave on the side of the hill. In order to prevent the appearance of demonized creatures and demons, James had specially arranged for 10 of the strongest Rodic sergeants to be stationed on the small platform outside. Every day, there would be a patrol team with torches entering the ruins of the temple inside to patrol. It was to ensure safety. After all, this cave was connected to the ancient passage. Although Kant had already explored the underground city of the Karst cave, his exploration was not completely effective. The area of the underground city, the subterranean river and the ancient passage, also led to a deeper place. A place that had not yet been explored was an unknown place. Even if there were demons and demonized creatures, Kant would not be surprised. That was why before he left, he had instructed James to guard this place carefully to ensure that nothing unexpected would happen. Of course, James guarded the place firmly and did not dare to relax. If there was really danger, their town would suffer the most direct impact. The construction of the city wall was slightly above the bottom of the mountain, just outside the cave. It could be said that if an enemy rushed out of the cave, they would come into contact with the inside of the town. Although there was a circle of city wall at the top of the mountain, it was only half a meter high. Even with the help of the arrow tower, it was basically useless. It was only to provide warning, lookout, and command purposes. Of course, fortunately, they had not encountered any enemies that appeared in the ancient passage. Under strict defense, the underground ruins of the temple were very peaceful. There was no abnormal situation. Rodic sergeants held torches and took the lead to enter the cave, entering the ruins of the temple. Behind them was Kant, who was leading the civilians who were carrying 4 long ladders. As the temperature dropped, a gloomy and cold aura circulated, and soon, the cave that extended downwards, passed through the stone doors, and entered the ruins of the temple. What a miracle! The mages from the Unfoth Empire exclaimed. Even the experienced lion knights raised their heads in surprise, looking at the ruins in front of them with a look of amazement. They had never been here before, and even the 7 mages who had seen all of this still had emotional expressions on their faces. They had a heartfelt admiration for the glory of the era of the gods and the ancient era. In terms of architecture alone, the descendants of the gods in the ancient era of the gods were not inferior to the Unfoth Empire. This was a glorious and praiseworthy achievement. In the vast space, the huge statue was carved out of the entire rock stratum. Although it had become slightly blurry over time, one could still see the power of the past, which was enough to shock one's soul. On the rock stratum above one's head, there were 2 dim yellow light pillars refracting the light, making the entire temple ruins dim at any time. However, one could still vaguely see things up close, just like the moonlight in the dark clouds. At the bottom of the statue, there were 2 coffins placed on the platform. Next to them were 2 corpses lying on the ground. Vaguely, one could see the golden robes and the black robes. The 2 robes were parallel to each other, but also seemed to be opposite. Under the dim yellow light released by the sun disk, there was a hint of mystery. Those were the goddess and the witch who had been killed by Kant. And the inner coffin that was completely made of gold that was covered in the stone coffin. Be careful! Bunduk commanded from the side. In front of them, the peasants were holding a wooden ladder that was 10 meters long and 3 meters wide. They carefully came to the side of the underground river. Along with the roaring current, they carefully leaned the ladder on the edge of the stone platform in front of them with the help of the hard stones on the shore. The other peasant's ladder also leaned over and was easily placed in 2 sections, just enough to isolate the underground river. The simple wooden bridge based on the wooden ladder was completed. The peasant climbed up carefully. After making sure that the wooden ladder was stable, he walked to the stone platform and came back. Only then did he report to the others with certainty, indicating that the construction was successful. Lord Kant, it's done. Bunduk reported. Yes, Kant nodded, but he turned to the back and ordered, let the rangers go up and take a look. Yes. The 10 Ravenstern rangers immediately complied. They held heavy bows in their hands and walked quickly to the side of the underground river. They stepped on the wooden ladder and walked to the stone platform nimbly. They cooperated with each other in an orderly manner. There were also people who pulled out the two-handed great swords on their backs and quickly checked the stone platform. There was once an abnormal situation there. It was the 2 women who had turned into corpses. They had to be careful. The mages were behind Kant and looked at the stone platform with solemn expressions. The 18 of them discussed with each other in low voices. Their expressions were uncertain towards the aura that was still lingering in the surroundings. Especially towards the 2 corpses, they broke out into a more intense discussion. Their voices were so loud that they caught Kant's attention. "What's going on?" Kant asked. "We found something different." The mages reported, "Those 2 corpses seem to be the product of pure positive energy bodies and negative energy bodies. How should I put it? Although they look like humans, they are more similar to Master Bunduk." "I don't quite understand," Kant frowned. "Well, it can be understood as a natural extraordinary physique that doesn't require training." The mages explained, "It's like Master Bunduk still needs to be developed, and those 2 corpses have already been developed. They are truly powerful existences. However, I can also feel that this pure energy has almost dissipated, and they have lost their lives. Only the last bit of pure elemental energy remains." "Got it," Kant shook his head. In fact, he still did not understand magic. "It's safe." In front, 10 Ravenstern rangers finished searching the stone platform. After confirming that there was no danger, they waved their hands. Kant turned to the mages and said, "Go and take a look." At the same time, he instructed the Lion Knights, "You guys follow closely. If you encounter any danger, protect these mages first." "Yes," the Lion Knights immediately responded. The mages' physiques were very poor. Their physiques were probably not even comparable to that of a level 3 footman. They could only be considered healthy adults. Compared to Kant, who had already been instilled with the body of knight, they were even more incomparable. They were good at academic research and studying spells. They were not used to close combat. Therefore, the mages were better at casting spells from a long distance, and not close combat like the knights. It was best to be careful. They stepped on the wooden ladder and stepped onto the stone platform on the opposite bank. The stone platform beneath their feet was carved with circles of patterns. It was mysterious and majestic. It seemed to be a supreme decorative pattern passed down from the era of the ancient gods. Kant had once seen all of this in books. After so many explorations, he now knew that this was the unique decorative pattern of the sun god, a symbol of divine might. But now, Kant was stepping on it. He stepped forward. The Lion Knights and mages surrounded him. Outside was the Ravenstern Ranger, who held a heavy bow and 2-handed greatsword. If not for the limited load of the wooden ladder, the heavily armored, fortress-like would have come to protect him personally. After all, they were the footmen who were best at close combat, and were the best candidates to protect Kant. However, with the extraordinary Lion Knights, this place would not be too much of a problem. However, the mages narrowed their eyes. Looking at the 2 corpses and then looking at the golden coffin inside the stone coffin, surprise appeared on their faces. They could not help but exclaim, "It's actually such a huge, strange object." Chapter 318, The Path of Golden Light. The mages had a strong sense of strange objects. When they came to the stone platform, the first thing they saw were the 2 sun discs embedded in the stone wall. However, what caught their attention was the coffin. The outer part was cut by blue stone, but the inner part was made of gold. Strange object. They immediately came to a conclusion. However, they couldn't suppress the shock in their eyes. "It's such a huge strange object." The 18 mages walked over quickly. The 2-meter-tall coffin was obviously taller than them, but they still found some broken stones and tiptoed to observe the coffin. Their eyes were shining. Kant also walked over. Seeing the mages discussing in low voices, he nodded and asked, "What did you find? Is this coffin also a strange object?" "That's right, it's a strange object." The mages answered affirmatively. "The golden coffin inside is the biggest strange object we found." However, there was still a different voice among them. With a hint of shock, they said, "This coffin contains extremely powerful positive energy. Although it's dimmed due to the passage of time and cannot be replenished, the remaining positive energy is still several times denser than the sun disk that has been appraised. This strange object? No, it can't simply be called a strange object. It's even possible that it's a divine artifact. We've sensed the rich positive energy in it. It's really too shocking. It's really a divine artifact." The mages discussed animatedly. Kant raised his eyebrows slightly. The term divine artifact was too shocking. He gently held the hilt of the sword by his waist. This sword of king could be called a divine artifact. In reality, it was a weapon that belonged to a king. Its symbolic meaning was more important than its actual meaning. The only powerful thing it had was to confer the title of a royal knight to a soldier. Conferred the title of countless royal knights with extraordinary powers. This attribute could be called a divine artifact. But the coffin in front of him. Kant was puzzled and could not help but ask with a frown, why can it be called a divine artifact? It contains powerful and pure positive energy. In our perception, it has already surpassed all the items in our impression. Even the Unfoth Empire does not have anything that can compare to it. This coffin being called a divine artifact is completely reasonable. The mages finally confirmed and gave a conclusion. It's a divine artifact. At this moment, a dialogue box appeared in Kant's vision. Ding! Special quest issued. Special quest, the beginning of divine artifact. Reward, extraordinary. Introduction, your mages have sensed that this coffin is extraordinary. After careful study, they have come to the conclusion that this is a divine artifact that is covered in dust. You plan to try to study this coffin and perhaps obtain an extraordinary power. Remark, please come into contact with this coffin. The system will analyze it on its own. On his retina, a dialog box popped up. Special quest from the system. Kant was slightly stunned. Ever since he had obtained a powerful faction, the system had not given him a quest for a long time. At this moment, a special quest popped up, causing him to be slightly stunned. However, he still clenched his fists tightly. This was an opportunity given by the system. Extraordinary. This was the reward given by the system for the mission. Even though he did not know what this was, based on the words, it was definitely related to a higher level of power. Moreover, the requirements for the mission were not high. Even the system had already given him a remark. As long as he touched the coffin, the system would automatically analyze it. It could be said that completing this mission was very simple. Guard the surroundings. Kant turned his head and ordered the knights around him. Yes, the Lion Knights immediately replied. With the light sound of unsheathing his sword, Kant walked over and stood on the stone that was raised high. Looking at the golden coffin in the inner layer, he did not hesitate to reach out and press on the golden coffin in the inner layer. A tiny stream of data spread in his palm. A faint data chain began to spread. In Kant's eyes, the golden coffin in front of him was instantly wrapped up by the stream of data that came out from his body. An invisible power rushed out and turned the stone wrapped outside into nothingness. That's right, it was nothingness. There wasn't even any powder left. The stone coffin on the outermost layer seemed to have disappeared into thin air. An extremely terrifying power was being displayed. The golden coffin finally appeared before Kant's eyes. It was about 1 meter tall, 2 meters wide, and 4 meters long. The entire coffin was carved with majestic patterns. The most obvious one was the lost city, or the sacred sun pattern that was unique to the sacred golden holy city. And in the center, there was a blazing sun that looked like the sun at noon. Buzz! A scorching aura bloomed in the golden coffin. It was as if something was awakening. The mages outside could not help but take half a step back. They looked at the sudden appearance of the golden coffin in shock. Furthermore, under Lord Kant's touch, more and more positive energy was released. However, no matter how much positive energy was released, it would not be able to break the seal formed by data. Kant's palm was already completely placed on the golden coffin. The scorching aura made his palm feel as hot as a teapot. However, he did not dare to let go. The golden coffin in front of him was already emitting streams of light in an attempt to break through the obstruction of the data flow. The scorching aura was really like the scorching sun at noon, making people sweat profusely. Kant had a vague feeling that if he let go, the power contained in the coffin would immediately explode. It was like the sun had swooped down. It would instantly burn any enemy who dared to invade into ashes. This was the golden coffin's countermeasure. However, Kant had yet to completely adapt to this sudden heat. A mysterious coolness instantly appeared in his palm. The data flow spread even more rapidly, and the entire golden coffin was already wrapped inside. The data chain was tightly wrapped around the coffin, and it even seeped into the interior of the coffin. The golden light circulating on the coffin seemed to be extremely unwilling, but the data flow was like boiling the frog in warm water. It slowly seeped into the coffin bit by bit, completely penetrating the coffin. Buzz, 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 buzz. But suddenly, the golden light struggled even more intensely. As if sensing the impending doom, it began to struggle crazily, causing the data stream to lose its stability for a moment. It took the opportunity to rush out of a ball of golden light, entering the ancient passage at high speed in an attempt to escape. The golden light was extremely fast. But the data stream behind it was even faster. With Kant's thoughts in mind, it caught up in an instant, entangling the ball of golden light in an attempt to pull it back. However, because the golden light seemed to be desperate, it could not be pulled back. As for Kant, his mind was filled with thoughts as the golden light struggled. Just like the god's view that he had encountered when he was building buildings in his castle and town, his mind was filled with thoughts as the golden light burst out, until it followed the golden light and rushed forward. But he could not see anything. However, he could feel that a golden light appeared like a path that extended into the distance. Kant's expression was shocked. An ancient passage. He could not help but mutter to himself. Although he could not see it, he knew that he could feel that the path formed by the golden light was in fact an ancient passage. He had once walked through it and even discovered the path to the underground city of the Karst cave. The golden light was following the direction of the ancient passage, from the ruins of the divine temple where he was to the west. Then it reached the underground city of the Karst cave. The golden light was even more dazzling. It seemed to be looking for some help, but it found nothing. The data flow seeped even more fiercely, making the golden light more anxious. Then it continued to spread along the ancient passage. In another ancient passage in the underground city of the Karst cave, it started to spread from north to south. It was like a 90-degree right angle. The golden light was still struggling, and the restraint of the data flow became stronger and stronger. Kant's thought was also spreading south along with the data flow that was restraining the golden light. Until the end, he seemed to be able to feel that the ancient passage had collapsed, but the golden light brought absolute power and broke through the mountain rocks with a bang. A huge hole was blasted out and it rushed out. A dazzling white light appeared in Kant's mind. It was the sunlight. He was momentarily stunned. His mind could clearly feel that he was under the rock wall of a river. He could even faintly sense 10 things in the surroundings. Sarandian horsemen. Kant muttered to himself. They were his soldier, but he had suddenly appeared there. But before he could think about it carefully. In the end, the golden light seemed to have lost all its power and was pulled back by the data stream attached to it. In less than 10 seconds, the golden light and Kant's thoughts returned together, whistling back into the coffin and his own body. Kant opened his eyes, and his right hand was placed on the golden coffin. The soldiers beside him were on alert. The Ravenstern Rangers, the Sarlian Lion Knights, the mages of the Unfoth Empire, and the Rhodic civilians were all waiting on the spot, as if they were waiting for Kant's orders. Everything seemed to be normal. On Kant's retina, a data box instantly popped up. Ding! Through your tireless efforts, the special quest has been completed. Special quest, the beginning of the divine artifact has been completed. Reward, extraordinary. Introduction, you have placed your hand on the coffin. A mysterious power is spreading within it. You are certain that this golden coffin is the coffin that hides the secrets of the gods. After the system's analysis, you have obtained a lot of useful information. Remark, you have received 100 honor points, 10,000 reputation points, 100,000 dinar. The system dialog box disappeared. The golden coffin also disappeared. However, the soldiers were not surprised by the disappearance of the golden coffin. In their eyes, this was the supreme miracle performed by Kant, and it was completely acceptable. On the contrary, the soldiers all turned their heads and looked in the direction of the ancient passage with surprised expressions. Kant also turned his head over. His pupils contracted. In the interior of the ancient passage, specks of golden light appeared in the originally dark place. They were like street lamps that lit up the neat and smooth stone pavement, extending from the entrance of the cave to the depths of the invisible passage. Chapter 319, Kant's Extraordinary Power. It was the light that was formed by pairs of eyes. Kant looked over. On the wall on the right, there was an ancient warrior carved in the rock layer. The two eyes that were originally inlaid with gemstones had a faint golden light, emitting a faint light that illuminated the path. From the entrance of the cave, it extended all the way to the deepest part of the ancient passage. Perhaps it was even possible to reach the underground city of the Karst cave. Or even further, the river that Kant had explored in his sense. What a strange experience! Kant muttered to himself. He could clearly recall the scene where he was flying through the ancient passage along with the golden light and data flow. He could also recall the underground city of the Karst cave. The golden light struggled around the temple twice, and finally rushed out of another ancient passage, until it broke through the blocked mountain rocks and rushed to the sunny outside world. It was a river. In the distance, there were flat plains and fertile fields. There were also Sarandian horsemen. When Kant thought of this, he instantly frowned. Something is wrong. This was very wrong. How could he sense his soldiers in a strange place, and there were still 10 Sarandian horsemen? After all, in this world, other than the Sarandians in Trondheim Castle, and the Sarandian horsemen that garrisoned at the central posthouse, there was no troop class from the continent of Karadia in other places. However, Kant was slightly stunned. A thought instantly appeared in his mind. This was the spy that he had placed earlier. Although Kant did not have many expectations on him, it could be considered as someone he had arranged. Borg, the young heir of the bankrupt merchant family in the East County. Kant instantly recalled. His eyes widened as he looked at the ancient passage to the south. His heart was beating faster, but his thoughts were becoming clearer. If I can see the Sarandian horsemen in other places, it must be them. That's right, it was Borg, the young man from the East County. Borg, who had luckily escaped from the patrol route of the desert bandits at the central posthouse and was captured near the Oasis lookout, was praised by Kant. Instead of dying, he had obtained a sum of investment. Kant gave him 5,000 great silver coins. He also had 10 Sarandian horsemen to protect him. They were also meant to monitor him. He did not expect that due to his busy schedule, Kant had no time to care about the spy he had set up. Now that he had accidentally discovered the spy, they actually appeared in a place that should not have appeared. This really surprised Kant. At the same time, he was puzzled as to why the Sarandian horsemen would appear there. They should be in the East County. Kant was deep in thought. However, he suddenly raised his head. Could it be, a conclusion appeared in Kant's mind, causing his breathing to become even more rapid. Finally, he highlighted the most famous geographical term in the Dukedom of Leo, the Resnistican River. It was the Resnistican River. The important artery of the Dukedom of Leo, the long river that ran from east to west. Sails were everywhere. Countless merchant ships and transport ships brought goods from other kingdoms. It carried away the Dukedom of Leo's grain, crafts, and all kinds of furs and goods. The river also nourished the fertile soil on both sides of the river, giving birth to fertile land and lush farmland. It could be said that it was precisely because of the existence of this river that the Dukedom of Leo became more prosperous. That's right. Kant had already confirmed his own conclusion. It was the Resnistican River. At that time, Borg, who had taken away Kant's 5,000 great silver coins as investments, was the young heir of the bankrupt family of the East County. It was very normal for him to appear near the Resnistican River that flowed through the East County. Perhaps the golden light had broken through the collapsed mountain rock barrier and was located at the mouth of the Resnistican River. This allowed Kant to sense his 10 Sarandian horsemen. One had to know that the ancient passage from the temple ruins went from east to west. After reaching the underground city of the Karst Cave, the ancient passage turned from south to north at a right angle of 90 degrees. If the direction was correct, it was indeed the river. And the final destination of this ancient passage was the mouth of the Resnistican River. Very good. Kant took a deep breath and smiled. It was perfect. Originally, the only way to conquer the Dukedom of Leo was through the Stone Pass. Although Kant had already controlled it, this pass was located at the East County. The barren area was still controlled and sealed by the other noble families. Kant had opened the door, and the path was still under the control of others. In reality, it was not free. Now, this unexpected news was really perfect. If this ancient passage could really lead to the East County territory and the river, then Kant would obtain a new route. Not only the Dukedom of Leo, but he would able to trade with the Silver Platter Kingdom and other kingdoms. After all, this river was an extremely important trading river that flowed through several human kingdoms. As long as Kant had goods, soldiers, and power, he would be able to build a new estuary force on the river. Even if he built a new town, he would be able to obtain the hegemony he deserved. Moreover, Kant also had 2 buildings, village and water bandit lair. A village could randomly produce a village. The water bandit lair was even more useful. It could directly allow Kant to produce the most useful water army in the early and middle stages. This is a new opportunity. Kant instantly came back to his senses. The smile at the corner of his mouth could not be hidden. He turned his head to look at the coffin that had disappeared beside him. He took a deep breath and secretly rejoiced, I really did not come here in vain. Not only did I not come in vain, I also gained a lot. Not to mention the discovery of the new route. Even the reward of honor, reputation, and dinar from the system was extremely valuable. 100 honor points, 10,000 reputation points, and 100,000 dinars. This was a bountiful reward that had never been seen before. Just these 100 reputation points alone were enough for Kant to draw 110 times from the system wall. Even if there were trash items, the items obtained could be considered quite profitable for Kant. As for the reputation points that could increase the speed of construction, recruitment, and training, as well as the crucial dinars, they were considered as icing on the cake. They were not as attractive as these 100 reputation points. Honor was the most popular reward. All of this was already in his bag. And at this moment, Kant's body began to throb. It was not a sense of danger. Instead, it was a power that was about to engulf his entire body. It was spreading out from the depths of his soul. Before Kant could react, he felt like he was instantly engulfed by this power. The sword of King by his waist was emitting golden rays of light. The might of the King of Glory was spreading out. What strong positive energy! The mages on the side spoke in astonishment. A breeze with a faint heat wave appeared in the void, brushing past their faces like a breeze. Everyone was suddenly startled awake. They immediately knelt on the ground. Including the Sarlian Lion Knights, the Rhodoc civilians, as well as the Rhodoc sergeant, crossbowmen, and Ravenstern rangers and wardens across the river, they all knelt on the ground with extreme respect. Everyone seemed to be facing the most majestic king, not even daring to raise their heads. Ding! Extraordinary loading. You have received, King's Power, Leader, Divine Power, Light and Darkness. Remark, please check the details yourself. A dialog box popped up on Kant's retina. It was the real reward of this special quest, the so-called extraordinary that had evolved into extraordinary power. King's Power, a power that can only be used by a natural king. It is the orthodox symbol of leading an entire country. 1. King's Spirit, any negative effects will be reduced by 50%. 2. King's Aura, anyone who sees you will feel fear. 3. King's Power, increases physical attributes by 200%. Divine Power, a power of justice that can only be used by a natural king. It is the supreme incarnation of all holy justice. 1. Holy Light, can release holy light to heal injuries. 2. Divine Domain, any injuries within the domain can be healed faster. 3. Divine Incarnation, as a divine being, your attacks will have additional holy damage. 2 kinds of extraordinary powers. Kant took a deep breath, his expression extremely solemn. After sweeping through the 2 kinds of extraordinary powers, although the introduction was simple, the effect of the explanation was extremely powerful. Whether it was the king's power that could directly go into battle or the divine power that could protect itself after dealing with the aftermath, they were both extremely terrifying extraordinary powers. They were practically tailor-made for Kant. It could be used in advancing and fight on the battlefield. It could be used while retreating to protect oneself. Combining the 2 extraordinary powers of battle and healing, Kant's own strength soared even more. This had already surpassed the power that could be obtained with his peak status of Body of Night. If Kant wanted to, he could explode out the extraordinary power within and directly defeat any enemy. With the help of the system, it was as if he had immersed himself in these 2 extraordinary powers for decades. He could completely use them with ease. He opened his eyes. A faint golden light appeared in his eyes. Kant looked at the people kneeling on the ground around him. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. He slowly raised his hand and said, "All of you, stand up. Thank you for your kindness." Everyone responded respectfully before slowly standing up. However, from their expressions, their respect for Kant deepened, as if they were fanatical worship. Kant shook his head and was still not used to this. He arranged for the mages and civilians, "First, study these sun discs. It doesn't matter even if we remove them. It seems that the positive energy here has been partially replenished." He raised his head and looked at the top of his head. A bright light had already appeared on the rock layer above him. It was not simply refracted by the 2 sun discs. It should be that when the golden light rushed out, it was like the faint golden light emitted by the eyes of the stone statue of warriors in the ancient passage. It activated some kind of ancient mechanism and was mysteriously replenished. Finally, it was able to carry out the lighting work. Even though it was still very dark, it was more than just a little bit brighter than before. Yes. Everyone responded and started to get busy. Chapter 320, The Most Important Arrangement. The 2 sun discs were dismantled by the civilians on the rock-carved chassis. The ruins of the temple with a glorious history suddenly became a little dim. However, as the golden light shone on the rock layer above, the light in the entire temple ruins was dim, but it was still barely visible. Moreover, the civilians and soldiers held torches high every few people, lighting up the surrounding environment. Of course, there was nothing unusual in the ruins. No problem. The mages nodded and felt relieved. Looking at the intact buildings around them, they reported to Kant with joy, my lord, the golden light not only charged the ancient passage, but also the temple ruins. It's good that there's no problem, Kant nodded. His face was calm, but his heart was relaxed. There was nothing he could do. This was indeed worthy of Kant's caution. He knew the consequences of rashly removing the sun disk from these historical buildings. Just like the temple ruins on the peak of the mountain, although most of it had collapsed, the faint divine power released by the sun disk had been preserved for thousands of years, and the overall structure was still intact. However, after he got someone to remove the sun disk from the arms of the stone statue, everything was gone. The originally solid stone seemed to have experienced the brilliance of 10,000 years in an instant. It turned into ashes in a blink of an eye. It really turned into dust. Even a gentle breeze could blow it away. In the blink of an eye, it dissipated on the entire mountain range and turned into soil again, returning to the earth. It could not be seen that it was part of the glorious temple. The main reason why Kant agreed to dismantle the two sun disks was because the mages had given a safe conclusion. After confirming that the ruins of the temple had been charged by the golden light and had a special structure, even if the sun disks were dismantled, there would not be a large-scale destruction. After coming to this conclusion, they arranged for the demolition with fear. In reality, Kant was currently standing at the stone door thousands of meters away from the stone platform. Behind him was the cave corridor. He could quickly evacuate to the outside world at any time. Even if these ancient ruins were all turned into ashes, it wouldn't have much of an impact. After all, this mountain was incomparably huge. Even if the interior collapsed, it would still be able to hold on for a short period of time. It was enough for Kant and the others to evacuate. The main reason was Kant's evacuation. He was the Supreme Lord, the ruler of everything. Naturally, he could not die here vainly. After the system's strengthening, Kant, who had mastered two extraordinary powers, had his physical fitness greatly improved. Although he had not completely reached the terrifying stage, it would not be a problem for him to run at top speed in a cave corridor that was just over 1,000 meters away. If he ran at full speed, he would be able to rush out of the cave in a minute. However, he did not have the chance to use it. It was safe here. The civilians worked together and carefully stepped on the wooden ladder. They walked past the top of the surging underground river and finally arrived at the stone square that had yet to collapse. They all heaved a sigh of relief when they stepped on the hard and solid ground. Even the Lion Knights, who were anxiously waiting by the side, also heaved a sigh of relief. If something unexpected happened, they were the last line of defense. With their strong physiques, they were able to catch the sun disk that had fallen into the underground river. If they could not catch it and fell into the turbulent underground river, they would not have a good way to salvage it for the time being. Unless the underground river washed the sun disk into the river beside the ancient passage. The water flow in the river was not considered fast. This was all a preparatory plan. It was naturally the best way to not use it now. The mages behind Kant moved forward and looked at the two sun disks that had been transported over with a hint of eagerness in their eyes. For them, although researching war-related spells was their main job, researching other spells was also considered an interest. Moreover, the magic system of this world was obviously different from that of the Unfoth Empire. In the opinion of the mages, they had even concluded that the magic system of this world was different from that of the world of Wind of War. Perhaps they could borrow the magic of this world and develop new spells. This was not impossible. The world of Wind of War was a completely chaotic world of war. All races competed for hegemony. Although the human race occupied the dominant position, they were still one of the contenders for hegemony. In fact, they were not invincible. If it was purely based on the individual humans, their combat power was still at a relatively weak level. They were completely dependent on the quality of their troops, their numbers were higher, and they had the protection of high-level combat power. That was how they were able to barely maintain their position in the world of Wind of War. For example, the Unfoth Empire relied on the race of the Storm Giants, the religious inquisition that spread throughout the human race, and the help of the war mages who specialized in destructive spells. That was how they were able to occupy the western side of the continent. In particular, the war mages were the main force in the army that could deal lethal damage to the enemy. Destructive spells were also studied by the war mages of past generations. Whether it was the magic ball spell, fireball spell, sharp golden blade, or the summoning of lightning, deadly frost, nature summoning, and group acceleration, they were all prepared for war. The magic ball spell was similar to a sledgehammer and could destroy shields. It also had a certain attacking effect on giant creatures with tenacious lives such as trolls, tree spirits, and giant dragons. The fireball spell was even simpler. It was the killing power of an ordinary troop class, so the explosion of the fireball was naturally more powerful. The sharp golden blade was an enchantment spell that increased the sharpness of the weapon's status. This was to increase the lethality of the ordinary soldiers and obtain more battle results in the intense battlefield. As for why they did not study defensive spells, it was also simple. After all, defensive spells wasted more magic power, and the effect produced was no different from having a shield. If a giant dragon-level creature stepped on them, they would still not be able to withstand it, and they would still die. It was better to focus on destructive spells and attack-enhancing status spells. In war, life was also at stake. Troops were expendable items. Even if they were used up, they could finish off the enemy. In the eyes of the politicians and generals, their mission was complete. As for the high-level spells, the principle was the same. To fight the enemy was the most important reason for developing better spells. If that's the case, Kant muttered. Looking at the two corpses that were also carried out by the civilians, who might still have special powers, he did not look down for a moment. He then turned to the mages and arranged, "I don't mind you guys studying those two corpses." "Understood. We really need those two corpses that have elemental physiques." The mages immediately bowed in gratitude. This was an opportunity. As a traditional human power, the Unfoth Empire still prohibited corpse research on the surface. Even if they secretly supported some mages to study corpses and undead, they were still a minority. One had to know that only the evil undead would study corpses. Only vampires and necromancers would control the souls of the dead, manipulate corpses, and blaspheme the honor that once belonged to the living. This was a taboo research. They were the ones who were dealt with by the extremely cruel religious inquisition. Not to mention the undead and demons. Even those who came into contact with evil energy could be captured by the priest of the religious inquisition and burned to death on the stake. They did not care whether they were old people or children, or what their past was like. Evil energy was an evil type of negative energy. It represented evil itself. But sometimes, evil still represented strength. Kant did not resist these mages studying evil spells. In fact, the mages who had been instilled by the system as Kant's loyal followers would not betray him. Instead, they would be of greater help to Kant after obtaining stronger power. This was a modification from the rules, stronger than the restriction on the soul alone. "Let's leave." Kant made the arrangements. The place had been dealt with, including the wooden ladder on the stone platform. The civilians carried 2 sun discs and 2 corpses, surrounded by soldiers holding torches, and left the ruins of the temple, returning to the town along the cave corridor. The sun was setting. In a short time, the sunlight that was already setting in the west had turned into the glow of the evening, hitting the mountains. It was already evening, and the temperature dropped with the setting of the sun. "Lord Kant." James walked over quickly and bowed. "I have prepared a banquet and opened a barrel of malt wine. If you don't mind, please stay here and have a good rest tonight." "Yes," Kant nodded. "I won't be leaving in the next few days." "That's great," James looked happy. The research needed time. However, Kant was planning to stay here for a while. The ancient passage attracted his attention. After all, this passage could lead to the Resnistican River. If it was well developed, it could even speed up his development, especially since he had already set up Spy. Borg, the heir of the bankrupt merchant family in the East County, needed to be put in use. All right. Kant made a decision in his heart. Manat and Jocelyn were in charge of guarding the Oasis lookout. Although they were not military generals, it was not a big problem for them to guard the place and ensure the safety of the Trondheim castle. Moreover, the royal knights, and heavy cavalry should have already returned. Those captives alone would not be able to cause trouble. The only thing Kant was worried about was the undead in the Naran desert. The spread of the skyveil of death was still very fast. 5 months was enough for it to spread to the vicinity of Trondheim castle, and 6 months was enough for it to completely cover Kant's Oasis lookout. Therefore, he did not have much time. It was just enough for these mages to temporarily study the sun disk and the 2 corpses. As for Kant, he would first use the time he had temporarily to study how to pass through the ancient passage to obtain more opportunities for development. He would ensure that the exposed path that led to the dukedom of Leo was completely in his hands, he would not let the other to seize it. The ancient passage could travel by water, but it could also travel by land. It could also travel by boat and carriage. By connecting the Resnistikan River, which was the most important shipping river in the dukedom of Leo, it was equivalent to connecting to a golden waterway. It also meant that he could obtain piles of golden eagles.